Listen, one of the perhaps more successful, I don't know how you judge it, but certainly one of the more active, if you like, community/lobby organisations in New Zealand was something called the Sensible Sentencing Trust. Do you remember that? Yes, of course you do. And you see, as I'm talking to you now, you're thinking, what happened to them? The Sensible Sentencing Trust was formed by a Napier man, Jess McVicar. I think he was a farmer, in 2001, largely in response to the prosecution and trial, if you remember, of Mark Middleton for threatening to kill Paul Daly. Do you remember him? The piece of human filth who tortured, raped and killed Middleton's 13-year-old stepdaughter, Carla Cardno. Due to public sympathy for Middleton over Daly's crimes, Judge Michael Lance sentenced Middleton to 9 months jail, suspended for 2 years. McVicar supported Middleton during his trial, and then after that trial, Garth McVicar and roughly 30 supporters established the Sensible Sentencing Trust to advocate for tougher sentencing for violent offenders, including life membership. Now, at one stage, their membership grew to, I think I've read media reports where they talked about 135,000 people. They had 3,000 donors. They had chapters established all over New Zealand. They were an absolute constant in the news media. And they had a number of members of Parliament who were either members of them or who supported them. And then they just disappeared. And Garth McVicar retired. The organisation was given to his daughter and to Derek Bell, an ex-New Zealand First Member of Parliament. And then after that, poof, it's almost as if they'd never existed. Well, in asking that question, we went for a bit of a hunt. And we tracked down Jess McVicar, and she joins us now from the Sensible Sentencing Trust. Jess, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for holding on for us. Much appreciated.
No worries. Thank you.
Your dad formed this organisation, and as you've just heard, it was bloody successful. Why? Mm-hmm. Where is it now?
I took over the leadership when my dad retired because they were going to close it down, and he could see I was still pretty passionate about the cause and everything that was happening, and so I took it over, and we got silenced basically. So just prior to my dad retiring, there was quite a pretty harsh media attack on him. A comment he made, and they were just out on the warpath, and this was kind of when Labor was coming in, and they were just out to get him. And so he started to be silenced a little bit then, and he was due to come up for retirement. And so then I said, look, I'll take it on. And yeah, we kept quiet. We still had all the supporters. I still had people ringing me. I'd have people ringing me like 11 o'clock at night, and this is victims, concerned public of what was happening, and we were dealing with all of that behind the scenes, but it just wasn't, the media weren't giving us the airtime. MPs, so mainly the government MPs in the Labor caucus, they just weren't meeting with us. They were either not replying to our requests to meet with them, or they would just be like, no, we don't have time, or they just didn't want to hear what we had to say because we weren't in line with where they were wanting to take the country. We, of course, still met with, the likes of National and ACT. They were still very interested in our policies and what we had to say, and because we were giving them the information from the front line of what was actually happening in the justice system. But, I got silenced. And then after that, Derek Ball reached out once New Zealand First were out of Parliament, and he said he'd like to join us. Which at that time, he understood where we were coming from. He was always very good with his policies, and he'd always sort of run things past us. And so I thought that was a great thing to have that support, because it was quite a bit just for me, as I had a full-time job as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think just after a beatdown and being silenced, I decided I just needed to try and focus on my business and building our future. It was sort of a battle that was taking a bit of a toll on me personally. Sort of we'd get death threats and a lot of personal attacks, and so it took a bit of a personal toll on me. And so I left, in end of 2021. Then we handed it over to Derek, and it's gone silent. It's frustrating for me, but it's kind of a choice I had to make on how I continued with the battle. But I don't know where it is right now, unfortunately.
Jess, we're just going to put you back. I'm just going to put you back to Josh to try and sort out your line and get it a bit more effective. And while I've just done that to you, Josh, so you take it over from there, mate. So we'll have Jess back in a second. Yes, just to give you a bit of a background, which you won't remember, is that Garth McVicar was very prominent until about 2014. And he joined the Conservative Party. You remember the Conservative Party? That was Colin Craig's mob, wasn't it? So it was Colin Craig. There was Garth McVicar. The president was also very prominent. We interviewed her last week. Who's now a councillor in Taupo, former head of Ministry of Social Development, Christine Rankin. So they had quite a few prominent people, and then it all sort of, we all know what happened next in 2014. So Garth McVicar was very much identified. It was probably the wrong thing to do. Is Jess okay to talk to us now? Yeah? Josh? Josh, I was just talking about your dad, though. It was, looking back, it was probably the wrong thing for your father to join a political party. I mean, the moment you do that, you sort of become tainted, don't you?
There was obviously a lot of media reports about that, but within our organisation and within our supporters, we didn't find any less support for anybody. The trust still continued on without him. There were obviously a few people, I think, within the organisation that had to sort of go. I think it might have been gone a little bit quiet at that time, but we didn't lose any support from any of our supporters, and I think there was just, honestly, from the internal view of ours, there was just this time where people were like, let's change the narrative. And we were the best people to attack. And for that, the old saying of lock them up and throw away the key. I mean, that was never our view on every single offender. But there was just this narrative that everybody that the media run with, and he was just the easiest person to attack, and they could find whatever they could.
And that's right. I mean, because your father was a conservative, a social conservative and a Christian social conservative, he was regarded by the mainstream media, particularly the liberal media, as being, there was something wrong with him, to be perfectly honest with you. And you're right, because he was also associated with Sensible Sentencing Trust. We can't definitely cover Garth McVicar in that role, because we don't like him in these other roles, so we'll just ignore him altogether. I understand that, but to be honest with you, who's out there advocating for the victim today? The Sensible Sentencing Trust had a significant impact upon lobbying for victims' rights and for the victims having far more say in the sentencing of individuals. But there's nobody out there in that role at the moment, is there? Do you perceive?
Not really, no. I mean, you've got Bob McCroskey of Family First, who...
same problem, really.
Yeah, I mean, I often had conversations with Bob, and just he was being silenced as well. It got to a point where it was just so much harder to get our data out there, to get our statistics out there, to get our stories out there. I mean, and I believe Bob was the same. We'd put a story to the media and they'd go, oh, that's not of public interest. And we're talking about a story of a victim who'd been violently attacked, or they had members who'd been murdered and the offender had been on home detention or something along that. And we were trying to get stories like that out there, and we were just getting silenced. They were just going, oh, it's not of public interest. And I don't know how that's not of public interest, because look at where we are today. And I mean, trust me, me and my dad still talk every day, and the frustrations of what we're seeing, but we're going, we just can't take this battle on anymore. It's, it has to be, there needs to be somebody who is willing to stand up against what we can see is wrong that is happening, and just go, you know what, I'm going to fight this. And that's what Dad did. He was just a farmer, and he just read the paper one day and said, I've had enough. I'm done with this. I need to do something about it. And it just needs somebody who's willing to do that.
I understand that, but it also needs somebody who's going to dedicate themselves to it. And as you say, there are
Yeah.
There are attendant consequences in doing that, which means you can't have a job. Let's be honest about it. You'd have to be self-employed, and even then you wouldn't have the time to be able to dedicate it to it. You've got to have a form of income. You've got to have a mechanism. You'd need, 6 figures a year to be able to run an efficient organisation and to pay yourself. So funding must have always been an issue, or did you got it through subscriptions? Did you? Is that how you got your funding in the past?
When they first started the trust, Mum and Dad paid for everything themselves.
Yeah.
So they funded it, and then they had people started to join them and who were doing donations to them. So we were solely funded on public donations as it started to build. We didn't get any funding. We always got declined funding. Even our victim advocacy side, who wasn't lobbying, we got declined funding often. So it was all public funding. We were not a government organisation. It was nothing like that. And so it was, and it is a 24/7 job. Like I said, when I took over, I was working full time. We were trying to build my partner's business at that time, and it took its toll because I was having to do sort of all that work in between my other job. And when Dad was doing it, he was on the road constantly. Doing speaking engagements to build up the membership and doing the meetings down at Parliament to, introduce the policies that SST believed would make a true effect on the criminal justice system. And it is a full-time job. It needs to have somebody who's passionate about it, but it also, they need to have an understanding for what victims actually go through in the justice system, because that is a huge part of where we build the policies.
Well, the justice system is in disarray. The court system is clogged and inefficient. One of the reasons that we were tempted to talk to you, of course, was to do with yet more sentencing from weak judges, letting bad people out who then go and commit more crimes. Nobody is holding. Now, you see, the Sentencing Trust used to hold those judges to public account, didn't it? And we've got no one playing that role at the moment.
No, and it is. To be honest, it is heartbreaking for us to sit there and to see that. I think we keep kicking ourselves, going, did we make the right decision? Because it is hard to watch and it's hard to sort of see where it's going. But even when I was doing it, there was still a lot of work in the background. And like I say, it just didn't get let out publicly. But we were still trying to fight it. And, we had a website called Judge to Judges. So we'd put up posts about the judges. And one day we got a phone call saying, you're going to have to take that down. That's not a fair representation. And we're going, well, we've got this off the sentencing note. So yes, it is. This judge keeps letting people out on home detention. But we got threatened with legal action if we didn't take it down. So there were things like that being thrown at us. So our voice was being removed from speaking out. I do think probably now times are changing, and
who threatened you, Jess? Who threatened you with legal action?
We had a few years ago now, so I'd have to remember, but it was a lawyer from, I don't think they were from the Crown, but there was a lawyer who rang us and had seen our post, and they just said, you can't post that. It's not accurate information. And so then we did a lot of work, and we said, well, it is accurate, because that was in the sentencing note. Anyway, we had to take it down, so because we couldn't afford legal action, we just weren't in a place where we could actually afford to take a battle like that on. I'd have to look back over the files. Like I said, it's 2 years ago. But
it wasn't official. It was somebody representing a judge legally. Was it a lawyer representing a judge or something?
It was a lawyer we first got the warning from a lawyer who knew us and was probably more concerned for me and the press release that we had done. And they rung us and warned us first, and then we got a phone call later, or it might have been even an email, just to say this needs to be removed. And so we had to remove the press release and everything. Yeah,
you're right. You're right though. You need a fund for that, but you also need you need to join the battle. It's funny how chilling a lawyer's letters is, isn't it?
Oh, it is, especially with someone who, my age, in my early 30s. It's like, this isn't something that I'm prepared to do, and and I knew a lot of the stuff that my dad sort of got put through, but he had a wider pro support network, and when my dad retired, a lot of the sort of people retired at the same time because they were sort of all of the same age of my parents, and wanted to enjoy their lives, and they dedicated so much of their time to SST. And so when I took it over, our numbers were a lot lower. And I mean, a lot of our main supporters were still there, and I'd meet with them as well. But everything just kind of dwindled away. It was almost when the Jacinda Ardern's first term government came in, everything changed a lot. A lot of people sort of just gave up, I think, and it was just going, we didn't know what to do. When Andrew Little had his hui, his criminal justice hui, we got all excited because, finally, okay, they might do something about it. But our first day there, we realised that the victims that they were referring to were the offenders. And that showed us the spiral that was going to happen in the justice system. And like I said, we still tried to fight it, but it just became incredibly difficult. Shut down by the media, shut down by MPs. It was just, and that was our main battles. And so we did petitions, and we still did select committee hearings and things like that. And, we still managed to get a few things over the line. Like we just got notification that they're looking into the victim, sorry, completely gone out of my head. So when they do the readings in courts, the victims... cultural reports or the victims... No, the victims fund. So when the victim stands
victim
up
impact
and
statement.
does their reading, the victim impact statement. So we did a petition to try and have that so they weren't sort of being edited as much anymore. And, the select committee have referred that to the government to say, hey, you actually need to look into this. This is something that is happening in the justice system. We got shut down so much, saying, no, they don't get edited. That's not a thing. But once we actually provided all of our evidence, they're now going, we need to look at it. So there were things still happening behind the scenes. We were still battling, but it just wasn't in the media so much anymore. And unfortunately, when you're not in the public eye, people do think you've disappeared. And, it kind of, I think that's ended up what actually ended up sort of happening. It sort of forced us out of being in that public eye and being that voice anymore.
It's a fair point.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you express really is that these organisations are so dependent on just a very few individuals. You've got to have the time, the courage, you've just pointed out the financial resources to be able to continue the fight. And when you are, if you like, gaslighted by the media, mainstream media, you've got to still stay in the fight. But maybe that's one of the reasons, for example, I've just looked at the Sensible Sentencing Trust, hasn't put out, or Derek Bell hasn't put out anything that resembles the statement since April of this year. Oh gosh, and there's a lot happened in the last 4 months in this victim and crime space, yeah?
Yeah, and that's something that's quite disappointing for myself and my dad, because right now would be where Sensible Sentencing Trust would be so vocal.
Oh, absolutely. Particularly around this election.
We'd be kicking and screaming and, and holding these judges to account. Absolutely. I mean, our system is currently kicking the victims to the curb, but we're rewarding offenders. I mean, and that's disgusting. I don't even know how anyone finds that acceptable within our government and within the judicial system. It's just... it's
well, when you've got an official cultural report, which essentially is an independent government-paid report that seeks to find a whole series of societal excuses for the actions of the person in front, rather than for the consequence upon themselves, then you'd have to say the justice system's pretty much geared against the victim, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's just, the whole court case now, the victim gets to stand up and do their victim impact statements. But what a lot of people don't know is, the victims, they don't get to write those till about 2 days until the sentencing. The government and everyone says, they get to write them whenever they want. There's just so many, for want of a better word, lies about what is actually happening for victims in the system. And then the whole court cases, the sentencing is basically around these cultural reports, and they're getting discounts for them. And it's so backwards. what they should be doing, if they're cultural reports, is they should be using their information to set compulsory rehabilitation courses for the areas of those concerned, instead of discounting them. So then these offenders are not actually getting that chance of rehabilitation, which is then putting the public at risk, as we're seeing. Recidivist offenders, it shouldn't be getting home detention, but they are. It shouldn't even be an option. But like I said, it's frustrations, and it's, this is what is happening now is something that we were warning was going to happen 4 or 5 years ago. We could see this was coming. As soon as Labor announced that they were going to lower that prison muster, it changed in the judicial system. We saw a lot more home detention for serious violent offending, like sexual offending, and then victims weren't coming forward because if they had been raped or sexually abused, the case either, they were getting home detention or it was getting thrown out or there was nothing that was really happening. And, police are putting all their resources into getting this case to court just for the judge to throw it out. So victims weren't coming forward as much either. So it was, and yes, it has lowered the prison muster, but look at our crime rate and look at the type of violence that is happening. It's disturbing.
Yes, indeed it is. Well, I hope you have the opportunity to think about this, connect with Derek Bell again, and maybe join some more people. There will be no shortage of people that listen, for example, to the platform. They'd be more than happy to subscribe, I imagine, for a small weekly fee to support the rejuvenation of the Sensible Sentencing Trust and whatever guise it is, because, dear Lord, victims in this country really need a say, and without you on the field, they lose an important lobbying part.
I'd put it out to the listeners there. If there was someone out there today that's went, you know what, I've got the resources to do this, or I've got the time to do this, I would more than happy assist them by giving them all of our contacts, the guides on how to do things, and would fully be behind them to be able to take on what we did. And I know my dad would too. We would help guide them fully. It's just not something that we could probably pick up ourselves again. But if there is someone out there who wants to do it, we will 100% help them.
Could you, so what's a contact for you, Jess? What's the best way? Have you got an email or something like that people could contact you through?
Yeah, I do have an email. I've actually still got my SST email because I still actually work with victims that I was working with before we closed down, because I've still got some victims who've got offenders in prison. So it's Jess McVicar. One word lowercase? One word lowercase.
Two S's, is that right?
Yes, two S's. At sst.org.nz.
Okay. Well, listen, we'll put that out over the rest of this week and make sure that if there is anybody out there with the resources, the time, and also the political smarts, and there are plenty of people like that who are platform listeners, to contact you. Thank you for joining us, Jess,
absolutely.
And the very best of luck to you.
No worries.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Okay. Jess McVicar, Sensible Sentencing. I'll just give it to you again. Jess, Jess McVicar, spelled McVicar. JessMcVicar, Jess McVicar at sst.org.nz. All right, so that's the email address, and I'll plug that into probably every day. There'll be somebody out there, because, dear God, I never haven't. Good on you, thank you, Josh. Never has the need for victims' perspective been more required than now. And in terms of legislation, in terms of judges sentencing, in terms of the justice system and the court system and the correction system, determined, it would appear, to cast the perpetrator of many crimes somehow as a victim, and of the disassociation between action and consequence. This has almost become official justice policy in this country. Never has there been a greater need for a victim advocacy service or lobbying service in this country. So not just walking alongside victims, but changing the law, lobbying policymakers and politicians, and jurists as to the practical consequences of their actions.